there's a book called He Came to Set the Captives Free. And it's about a woman that is a doctor in an emergency room, and she kind of stumbles upon a cult. And this is a true story, and it's a kind of a detail about how she battles it and what they do, their practices. But one of the things that they do is they work in maternity wards, practice like a coven of witches in a maternity ward, and some of them will take children's blood. I'm just wondering if these people who are doing these things down the line, is it like gematria? Is their name just like lined up with whatever the sun, so therefore they play this role? Or were they like always designated to play this role? Because was there some kind of a ritual at the beginning of their life or at some point in their life that they maybe know or don't know that they've consented to, and then eventually, you know, here comes
didn't the fates in Greek mythology have like a string attached to everyone that was like their destiny
Silver
was already
cord.
right? Like, and I kind of think all that stuff was real and or is real, right? Like those are the lower G gods, and some would say I think even the fallen angels would be some of those, like Zeus, right? Like we were saying, like I think that's possible. And then when you said the thing with the Coven of Witches, Top, I'm like, well, let's go back to the theater, the illusions of the world, and talk about Rosemary's Baby. That dude, Polanski, made a movie called Rosemary's Baby, and then was a part of one of the grisliest CIA murder crime scenes with the Manson stuff, you know? And when he was out, I think he was in London when the murders went down at the Tate LaBianca murders. He was telling someone about how crazy it would be about people getting murdered. You know, like, so it's like, I don't believe in coincidence. I think there are entities out there who are kind of like able to look at all the different outcomes and then manipulate it, whether it's the Tartaglione guy I'm telling you about, whether it's Trump, MAGA, all that stuff, whether it's just people at home, just everyday murderer.
With Project Looking Glass is the idea that they have the ability to view potential outcomes, but that's very much a refinement of an old practice in mediumship, right? Where mediumship, I believe that there are people that have some sort of a gift and can see futures, but I think they're potential futures. I think that, you know, they can kind of see things play out if you do this or you do that. But it kind of brings me back to this point that we said before, right? Everybody got to the door and they think that it's the Jews, despite the fact that the door is covered in all this esoteric symbolism and the sigils of different gods.
Right.
And we had the same thing happen with Epstein. And it's the same thing that Top is talking about, where it's like everybody just thinks that the government is potentially involved in human trafficking. Yep. Maybe there are kids being snatched. You hear horror stories of like nurses on their deathbed being like, I swapped out 2,000 babies in the maternity ward. Nightmare stuff, right? But for some reason, people stop there. Even with the Epstein thing, it's like, oh, well, he's being massaged with by 16-year-old girls. That's what the damage control that the Netflix documentary did, where it kind of absolved Ghislaine Maxwell and made it seem like Epstein was the mastermind of everything, and she was kind of a victim in many ways. And it was only teenage girls, but it gets much more horrifying than that. And especially when you consider that there was a temple with the owl, a golden owl of Minerva in it. And, and everything is done in a ritualistic fashion. Top's talking about a coven of witches that are trafficking children or doing whatever they're doing to children. It's like people keep stopping at what's tangible and leaving on the board the esoteric and the occult.
One of the examples given in that book was a child was born with a deformity, and the mother couldn't afford to pay for the surgery at the time to fix it. And the nurses were like, "Hey, we'll get together and pay for this. Well, just a vial of blood from your kid." And the mother's like, "Of course." And there you go. So I wonder how often that practice is done.
I think all the time. This is why I had a home birth. Like, I'm not going to the hospital. Like, look, hospitals can be great, obviously. I'm not anti totally, but I'm pretty against, like, after having 2 kids in a hospital and seeing how they're kind of like tyrants with your babies.
Dude, I hate it.
It's crazy. Like, and we reject all the vaccines, or most of them, for the second one because we didn't really know yet. The first has a few, and then they come in there and they're like, the third has none. They come in there and they're like, you need to give the kid like this and that. I'm like, what? Why? And then they look at you like you're crazy if you say no. I'm like, this is my kid. I'm like,
and then they look at you like, are you fit to be a parent?
Oh yeah, dude. They could literally report you.
My second during COVID, and at one point they actually took him out the room and they were about to put vitamin K.
Yeah.
I don't know why it even needs that.
I know.
And it was like, where's the kid? Because we're like tired. And I ran down and I was like, yo, stop that. I'm cursing them. I'm like, don't fucking touch my kid. And they're like, oh, we're just gonna. Then after that, like my wife's having trouble with the breastfeeding. The doctor comes in and we want to ask questions about breastfeeding, and they're like, so it says here no vaccines. You're not gonna. And I'm like, what? And then they're just like detailing what the vaccines do, and I'm just like no, we're asking about breastfeeding right now, doctor. And they're like, oh no. That doesn't, like, the baby doesn't have to eat.
Like, you're not going to our main sponsor. It's a great product. It's a great product.
He obviously gets kickback. Dude, it's crazy. So our first we did delayed for just a few, and then we learned by the second, like, we're just not doing anything. She has maybe one, and then but they did the same thing both times. They come in and they're like, you can talk about anything. And we also had problems with breastfeeding at the first time. They put our son in the NICU, and I don't think he even had to go to the NICU. He was full term, but they were worried about jaundice, and he's in there for a week, and he's hooked up on wires.
I hate it.
Oh, dude, it was horrible. That really changed me, because that's the first time the only time I saw a child that had no skin. Because it was born so young, and I saw through the body and saw the blood pumping, and I'm like, oh my goodness, people want to murder this, in this world. They don't care. That was and that was 8 years ago. That was a big change for me. But at the end of that week, after all the horrors and the wires and the sounds, it's like a circle of hell. They let us go, and they're like, just put him in the window. He just needs some sunlight. I'm like, why did you make me stay here for a week? And it'd be absolute horrible.
In this bizarre prison where if I stand my ground too much, then you're going to look at me like I'm an unfit parent.
Yep.
And I feel like you can do something about that.
Yep, dude. So I learned, and then, we also had a baby during COVID. And that's when they also, I think you're still in New York, right? And I think we talked about that last time I was on your show. I learned at that point, we both learned these places are not for us. I've also seen hospitals kill people. Like, I've seen a hospital legitimately I saw someone not wash their hands coming out of a C. diff patient's room and then touch my wife's grandfather, who then died of C. diff. And then I saw them, not similar, but it was kind of similar in Florida, something similar 2 weeks later with my grandfather. Our grandfathers died within 2 weeks of each other. Crazy time. So I spent a lot of time in hospitals. And then, having a child is beautiful. So it's like, it was beautiful and like amazing. I'm holding my kid for the first time, but it's so unnatural, and they want to cut you off from that miracle. It feels like in the hospitals, at least the ones I've dealt with, because they can't all be like that. And there have been nurses that were great, but I think about my grandma, when she gave birth to my mom, they just walked around and gave every mom pills to dry up their breast milk. And at that point they were saying, basically, they weren't saying this, but this was like kind of propaganda. Poor people breastfeed, and you're going to use formula. And you can, and so my grandma, that was like in the late 50s, early 60s. Everyone her age in her community, when she wound up in Florida, all took those pills, and no one thought any better. They were just like, sure, the doctor's saying to take it. Sounds good. We'll just do formula. That is just another way of the engineers of this horrible, hellish, false reality separating you from the divine. Breastfeeding is incredibly important, I think. And it's crazy to me to think that not only will they walk in and give your kid all this stuff that they don't need, but then they'll turn off your mom's supply. What a crazy world.
These machines are like fine tuned to be to our detriment. You look at like the whole Planned Parenthood thing and how they've managed to convince, I would expect through the feminism movement, they've convinced people to fight for this apparatus like it's for their own good. Never mind the fact that, Margaret Sanger, who is a known eugenicist, and I believe also a big fan of Hitler, if I'm not mistaken. There's some sort of correlation there.
I don't know that. Did she think he was based too?
I think she probably thought he was based. Yeah, she's like, I saw Europa. But, she was a eugenicist, and she wrote about her disdain for the black community. And now if you look at it, it's like the number one ethnicity that is using Planned Parenthood because they're always in low income areas, is the black community. And you go, and then you see people in the streets fighting for those buildings to stay open. And, you know, if you talk to Top's always going off. It's like it's a mass baby sacrifice to Moloch.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly how I feel. I think I was just going to ask you guys, like, are all these things, the mass human sacrifice, the baby sacrifice, the hate that is put in these silos to then blame people that could lead up to the consequence of mass murder, is this all part of their plan to create these fear rituals? Or they feed off the energy? Like, what is the goal?
Yeah, it's like they're looshing off human suffering. I think that's what so I think, you know, the first commandment says, "Thou shalt take no gods before me," and it's super important. That's why he said it first. But what God really wants, God, uppercase G, God, is your worship, your adoration. He wants a relationship with you. And these small G gods, fallen angels, they want the same thing. But you know, if they can't get worship from you, they'll take your fear. I think it's these are like the idea of adrenochrome, or the idea of I don't even know if I could say. I'm sorry. The idea of Monsters Inc. That movie.
Yeah.
Harvesting fear.
That's right.
Right. So we had like adoration, worship, and fear kind of probably feed the same louche monsters. They want this thing. But your idea, what you were talking about, like having your kid at home, it's such a powerful thing to do. And if you can do it, I think you should. If I ever had another one, I would, because I often think about my son and my daughter as well. Like, they're brought into this world in this ungodly environment, this white room filled with people who don't care. There's machines beeping. Their mother might be drugged. My wife had a what's that shot?
Epidural.
Yeah, she had an epidural, so their mother's drugged up. It's a disaster. And then they put you in a room for 2 days to a week where it is even more of a disaster. There's other screaming babies. It's just a cold place.
Yep.
That's how my kid started his life.
Right.
And then during COVID, my kid continued his life with, not seeing the facial expression of people. The world completely shut down. No one able to come around him at all. Everyone's acting strange. What they did, I put a tweet out not too long ago, but what they did is unforgivable. And I like to joke around a lot, but when I say no amnesty, I mean it. And if I'm ever in a situation, or if I'm ever in the position to exact the revenge, which I probably shouldn't, because revenge should be left unto God, but these people deserve zero quarter.
Is this Top announcing his run for politics?
I am running for president.
I often think too, it's like the way that they've fed this machine, this baby industry, is they manipulate women with fear. They use the propaganda machine. Every scene of childbirth is the most traumatic thing that any chick has ever sat down and watched in her life. By the time she is an adult and she's ready to have a child, she's very sure that she wants an epidural. She wants this to happen in the hospital. She wants painkillers. She wants this to be done with.
Yes.
It's amazing that they've removed the agency of motherhood from women who have been, by the way, birthing all the human beings in the world since the dawn of time. Yeah. And now we've been convinced that we need this medical apparatus to do it. But
not just that, like if it's taking too long in the hospital, they just be like,
they want that turnover rate.
Honestly, it's an assembly line. It's an assembly line. And now they want to plan, they want to plan the births more and more. Like, that's becoming a popular thing, being like, well, just pick a date, we'll do a C-section, and then on top of that, we're going to have designer babies. I mean, they're just robbing you of any divinity, any god.
A designer baby is a particularly gay thing to call a baby. It's a terrible thing to call a baby. It's like designer baby.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Shane? That's like a political thing, right? Trump is saying that he's going to fund IDF.
Terrible.
IVF.
Terrible.
IVF.
Well, that's a good Freudian slip too. I don't like it. I hate the idea of taking away the ability of people to have kids, but IVF to me it can be kind of, that's its own little mass sacrifice. Yeah. If you don't have the money to afford to keep all the embryos going, which I don't think anyone does, unless you're, a Kardashian, and they probably have a warehouse of embryos like that they eat. But I don't. I don't think that's good. I talked to someone recently she's on the left. She's a doctor. She worked with the IVF stuff, and she's pretty liberal. And she was very outraged. And this is maybe a year ago, but this is. She was like, "This is terrible." They're like, "There's just all these basically children, these embryos in a warehouse that we just destroy." And that's a weird thing to, I'm not on board with it.
It is.
It's another one of those things that Trump is saying. I'm like, look, I'm still going to vote for him. There's so much I liked about his first term. But there's also a lot that he's done that I really don't like. And some of that stuff is the most important stuff. Like, okay, we can talk about lockdowns and whatnot. He did give it to the states, and the states fought over it. That's one thing. He did do warp speed. I hate that. But again, the argument would be he let the states, duke that one out. But the IVF stuff and him calling abortion like reproductive rights is like, oh man, now he just sounds like a leftist. So I don't know if that, I don't think he's the Antichrist either. I think he's probably just surrounded by really bad yes men. Maybe they're not even yes men. They're above that. They are engineering his thoughts in ways that give us that produce really bad ideas. Because he also seems a little deflated. But yeah, when it comes to that stuff, I just don't dig it. But there's really important things I like to talk to him about that are only important to us and the people listening. Like I want to hear about John Trump and Tesla. He talks about his uncle. He's talking about John Trump at rallies. He knows about it. Like that stuff. I'm like, I mean, obviously that's not going to help out an election. It might help my vote. No, I'm going to vote for him anyway, but he's obviously connected to really big stuff, and he's super interesting and funny. But yeah, the IVF stuff is something I will not accept, and I think it's okay. I think Raven, I think you said this earlier. It's okay to want to vote for someone and not agree with all their stuff. But I will constantly always call out the things that I think are bad. I'm not going to all of a sudden accept certain things that go against my morals because the guy I'm voting for thinks it's cool. So we'll see. We'll see. It might help him get votes in the end, but my thing is I don't think it matters who's president. The way to fix the country is going to be spiritual, and it's going to happen from the ground level up. You're not going to like Trump had all Republican House and Senate, and there was nothing done really in that first quarter, I guess, of his first term, however long it was. So it's like you can't rely on these people. You can't turn them into idols. You just got to work on yourself and your community and raise families. And, I'm against the idea of that, what you were saying, the little season. I did hear that recently because as parents, we have to have hope for the kids that they're going to inherit like a positive future. I mean, it's an evil world. You can be positive within it, and you can spread the positivity. So that's just where I'm at. I just tell my kids, you're never going to get the Neuralink. And tell about human sacrifice. We haven't talked about fake clouds yet, but that's coming soon. We're homeschooling, so fake clouds, that's next semester.
Top said it before. He's like these entities, they'll take your veneration. If they can't get that, they'll feed off your fear. Yeah. And if you look at the propaganda machine, it just kind of makes me wonder, like we're talking about a mass sacrifice ritual, but are we also, because I said it earlier, it's like you are feeding something spiritually. We're detached from the spiritual realm in the West. We don't understand it, but it is real nonetheless. And most of our decision making feeds into some sort of spiritual aspect. And I just wonder, it's like when you plug into a propaganda machine, that seems to be the number one thing that they are trying to implement on your life is fear. Yeah. What are you feeding then? These things are having a heyday. They're eating babies. Yep. They're siphoning off all this fear, this depression, this anxiety. I would say as a culture, we've never been more anxious. More of us are on antidepressants and SSRIs than ever before. And I think that has gigantic spiritual ramifications. And I think the stronger these things get on the other side of the veil, the more they can affect what happens here. It's a vicious cycle. We're just feeding into it. And, it's like every day we wake up to new man-made horrors beyond our comprehension. And I wonder sometimes if they're not so man-made, if they're just nudged by these things that are just, they're in the gym. Every time, something happens with Israel and Palestine or Iran and Russia and Ukraine, these things are just pumping iron in the gym, and they wake up the next day and they get back to it.
Yep.